Welcome to Chapter 3, which is Organizational Strategy, Information Systems, and Competitive Advantage. Now, this is a very important chapter for how to take what we're going to learn in this class and actually apply it in a business to help drive that business forward, help with competitiveness of the firm that you're at, and when you're in management, you'll use these concepts to drive yourself forward. Once again, I have the study guide posted on Canvas, so follow along with that, and that will assist with your quiz. So the chapter starts out with a case study about Falcon Security. Again, talking about the drone decision and 3D printing, and I guess a temptation that business owners have is to try to be everything to everybody, to think you can take any opportunity and pursue it. And in this chapter, we'll talk about how you don't really want to do that. You want to. It's really hard to be low cost and high quality. You're going to have to essentially pick one of those and pursue that completely. So what we have with Falcon Security is a temptation with some of the people on the team to try to do everything, and that kind of dilutes the quality and will impact the competitiveness of the firm. So a key part of that conversation, I'll read it here, when talking with Alexis. Well, we as a company, who are we? We've always been known as a company that provides security monitoring, and we've got some big contracts. I get that. But there's a lot of money we could be making in agricultural survey, industrial inspection, real estate videos, wedding videos. I think we're really missing out. So there is a temptation to go into these new markets, new areas, and we'll talk about some of the perils of doing that and some of the benefits of trying that in this chapter. Here are the study questions that we're going to go over. And this is a big picture concept I want everybody to get familiar with. Organizational strategy determines information systems, not the other way around. There's a temptation sometimes to say this is the information system that we have currently available, so that will determine our strategy. That's not how it should work. That's an inversion of how it should work. You should have an organizational strategy and then build your information systems around that. And so this goes from left to right with how this should organically work. So you start with whatever industry you're in, that's structured a certain way. And then you come up with a competitive strategy within that industry structure. And we'll talk about this in a couple slides. You'll build value chains from that competitive strategy. Business processes come from those value chains, and information systems support those business processes. So, the competitive strategy of an organization determines its value chains. The competitive strategy determines the value chains, not the other way around. The competitive strategy followed by an organization is derived from the structure of the industry. So whatever strategy you decide to do comes from the structure. And just because it's such an important concept, I'm going to read it again. Organizations examine the industry structure and determine their competitive strategy. That strategy determines value chains, which determine business processes. The structure of business processes determines the design of supporting information systems. So that's like a funnel where it goes to high level to granular, actually getting stuff done. So what forces determine the industry structure? Well, there's two big ones. There's competitive forces and bargaining power forces. So, and under those competitive and bargaining, you'll see 3 forces under competitive and 2 forces under bargaining. And that's where we get our 5 forces from. It's these 5. And they're broken into 2 categories. So why did Porter do this? Why did Porter come up with this construct? Well, Porter developed the 5 forces model to help organizations determine the potential profitability of an industry. So he's not looking for a firm, he's looking for an industry and its potential profit. And Porter's 5 competitive forces can be grouped into forces related to competition, and bargaining. In Porter's model, the intensity of each of the 5 forces determines how sustainable that profitability will be. If it's extremely intense, that might not be sustainable. But if it's not very intense, it could be sustainable profitability, because that intensity is going to work against sustainability. So we'll look at a scenario to help kind of, because this is pretty abstract and theoretical, but let's say there is switching costs. So what's a switching cost? Well, switching cost would be if you supply plastic for a GM factory that builds cars, and you supply plastic for the dashboard. Let's say you've worked with a GM for 20 years. You've got supply routes. You've got your factory right next to GM. Everything is built, customized for them to accept your special type of plastic. And so if they wanted to switch vendors from you to another plastic company, it would cost, there would be significant cost to GM for doing that. And that's called a switching cost. So if the switching costs were extremely high, the strength of the competitive force would be low. The reason why competitive forces are low when switching costs are high, it's because there's going to be less competition, because it's going to be harder for people to choose a different competitor. Another one would be if there is less competition from new competitors. If there's not many new competitors, then this competitive force is going to be low. If there's less competition from existing rivals, it's going to be low. If your suppliers can kind of shut you off and cause a lot of damage to you, and they're not easily replaced, well, then the bargaining power, then the bargaining force is going to be, low. But if like a large client wants a discount and they're a large client, well, the bargaining force is going to be fairly high. And we're going to run through some scenarios on the next 2 slides with this. So for these scenarios, we have bargaining power of customers. So an example of a strong, we'll do a strong and a weak for each one of these. So strong force for bargaining power of customers would be like Toyota. If they're the customer buying auto paint, they're a huge customer, and they'll have paint in a huge volume, so they'll have a strong bargaining force. A weak force would be, as a student, your power over the procedures and policies of Lincoln College, because you don't really have much power there. Threat of substitutions. A frequent traveler's choice of auto rental. So they have plenty of options to rent a car from. That's a strong threat of substitution force. A weak one would be like patients. There's only one drug effective for a type of cancer. They only have one option for it. Bargaining power of suppliers. If you're a new car dealer, because you control what the price of a vehicle is and the customer can't verify the accuracy of that, well, the new car dealer has a pretty strong bargaining power. A weak one would be grain farmers in a surplus year, where actually in any year they don't really have much power to set prices. Threat of new entrants. A corner latte stand. That might be an easy business to replicate, so that's going to be a strong threat. There's a strong threat of new entrants coming in. A weak one would be a pro football team, because that's really difficult to get a pro football team. It's very unlikely that a new entrant's going to come into your city. And then rivalry. A strong force for rivalry is going to be used car dealers. There are many to choose from, but a weak one would be Google or Bing. It's expensive to develop and market a search engine. So another one from the study guide. A position of strong bargaining power would be coffee planters during a season of frost that decreases production. So if you have decreased production, these coffee planters are going to be able to charge a premium because the market will determine that. Sort of the inverse of this grain situation. Threat of new entrants, that's in the Five Forces model, which is customers possibly taking their business somewhere else. And so that's here. Like if you're a corner latte stand, you could have a couple of different places customers could go to or get introduced. But the pro football team, you don't have to worry about it. The threat of substitutions, they may not be viable because you don't have the internal technical expertise. Like with this cancer drug, it's going to be hard for another company to get FDA clearance and all that has to go into a new cancer drug. That's why it would be a weak force. That lack of internal technical expertise. Availability of raw materials being limited would be an example of bargaining power of a supplier being strong. If you have limited materials, then and you're the provider of that, well, you can kind of set a premium for what you're trying to do compared to other years. And the bargaining power of a customer is weak if the availability of a substitute is limited. If you go to an airport in the middle of nowhere and there's only one auto rental place, well, that's a weak bargaining power for you. So from the case study from the book, let's look at how they responded to the Five Forces and the Five Forces powers that they're presented with. So with bargaining power of customers, a large account wants more services at a lower price. It's a pretty strong bargaining force of the customers. So what are their responses? You can lower your prices or you diversify into other markets so you're not beholden to this customer. Threat of substitutions. You replace drones with wireless IP web cameras, the medium force strength. How could you respond? You could offer differentiating services like LiDAR, that's a radar, laser radar, that cameras can't provide. So you make it so that you can't really just switch to IP web cameras. Bargaining power of suppliers, increasing the cost of the drones that we sell. Well, that's pretty weak because you're going to end up just making your own drones. Threat of new entrants. Amazon begins offering package delivery and surveillance via drones. Well, you just offer differentiating services and enter other markets. That's a medium force strength. I would think anytime Amazon gets involved, that's going to be strong, actually. But anyway, rivalry. A new drone company expands its operations into the state. Well, that's a weak force strength. You offer additional features like direct streaming video to the customer. So Porter, along with giving us 5 forces, also gives us 4 generic competitive strategies. Before we get into this little matrix here, talking about an organization responds to the structure of its industry by choosing a competitive strategy. So we talked about that a couple of slides earlier. In the order of operations, you have the industry structure, and then you choose your competitive strategy from that. And so these are kind of the options you pick from and at a high level. And what are some of these options here? You have, well, if you look at this industry, in this matrix, how it's set up, you have industry-wide and then focused. Okay, so the difference here would be industry-wide would be if you're a shoe manufacturer and all of your shoes have light-up bottoms, all of them. That would be like an industry-wide strategy. But if you have a focused one where you have low-price sneakers and then you have like $400 a pair Yeezys or something, like that would be a focused, you would have a focused product line. It would also be like the difference between Ford, which has vehicles from all over the price range, to like Lexus, where it's only upper income. That's like a segmented industry thing. So you could compete on cost. Um, and here's how you can compete on either cost or differentiation. And I said on the first slide, businesses a lot of times make the mistake of trying to do both of these. You really have to pick one or the other. It's very difficult to do both of these really well, to be the lowest cost and differentiated. So your options are, you can do lowest cost across the entire industry. You can do lowest cost within an industry segment. You could go for better service or product across the industry. So this would be like a Lexus, possibly, and then better product service within an industry segment. So that would be maybe like just a Lotus car. You're only in one industry segment, and you're not worried about cost. You're worried about differentiation, and you're not worried about the entire industry. You're worried about one little segment. It's kind of an abstract concept, but it's important that you know that you're not going to straddle all four of these competitive strategies successfully. So if we had a uniquely formulated anti-aging cream targeted at women above the age of 40, that would be product differentiation within an industry segment. That is so specific that you're really going after this only. So now we're going to move down. Actually, let's look at this. So we've looked at, let's go back to this slide. We've looked at industry structure, how it's composed. We've looked at the competitive strategy. Now we're going to look at value chains. So this is the value chain model. And Porter defines, let's define what value is, actually how Porter defines it. Porter defines value as the amount of money that a customer is willing to pay for a resource, product, or service. So let's look at the value chain to make that value a reality. See, this is broken up into primary activities and support activities. So these are the primary things that a company does where you're interfacing with a customer. You're providing core business functions, and here are support things that go with it. And it kind of intuitively will make sense. Like, you have to acquire the drone parts, produce one, ship it, market and sell it, and then service the customers. Those are primary things that your company has to do. But there's support activities, which are like manage supplier relationships. It's kind of a soft skill. Investigate new designs, research, hire and support employees, HR, manage company resources with the firm infrastructure. So these are pretty concrete, like metrics that you could meet. It's pretty defined. This is more abstract, and you'll notice a lot of the support activities are more abstract. Like, how do you measure how well you investigate new designs? Well, it's really hard to, because that's research work. But you can figure out how many parts you've acquired, how many you've marketed and sold, how well you're servicing them. And each step in the value chain, you have margin, which is value minus the cost. And so each one of these you do well at, you will have a higher total margin for primary activities and then support activities. And that will inform your overall total margin. And some companies, depending on what strategy you pursue, you could decide to take losses at different parts here. You could decide to take a loss at servicing customers. If you're worried about providing a high value experience for your customer, like a luxury brand, you might be willing to take a loss here servicing them. But if you're competing on discount prices, you might not care how well you service your customers. And that is not informed, that decision to do that is informed here. The decisions that go into the value chain are decided based on the competitive strategy. And this value chain as a whole, you could describe this as a network of value creating activities, because there could be value created at all of these points. So if you look at this, like support activities, negotiating prices would be supplier relationship. That would be a support activity, price negotiation. Customer service would not be support. That's a primary activity. Your contributions to margin can be calculated easily. No, not at all. It's very difficult in many cases to do that. And then the contribution towards a product's value is negligible. Well, that's not true either. Even though it's hard to calculate, there could be immense value built from supporting activities, especially if you look at the companies that do research really well. And in here, in this model of business activities, in a value chain model, there are linkages, which are interactions across value activities. So linkages are things that tie these together, like what ties together acquiring and producing drone parts is, well, you have to acquire them in order to produce it. That's a linkage between those two. There's not a direct linkage between acquiring drone parts and shipping drones. You have to do something in between, which is producing them. And it's not always going to be this nice linear flow. Sometimes there's going to be multiple layers in the primary activity and support activity, but this is just a simplified visual model. If you had a visual network like this, you'd want to have some good descriptions for these primary activities. And here's how they would be kind of described. One that you'll want to focus on is firm infrastructure, is general management, finance, accounting, legal, and government affairs, and that is under a support activity. So management, accounting, legal, government affairs, that's firm infrastructure, and that would be under a supporting activity. But here are primary activities and their descriptions of what goes into those. Bike rental company. Let's say you had, this is, I'll give you a moment to think about what this represents here. But here's a value chain. If this is your value chain, what precedes the value chain? Well, let's go back up here, and that is our competitive strategy, which is informed by our industry structure. And so our strategy is low-cost rental to students. So low-cost rental to students is what strategy we're deciding to pursue, and that's informed by the industry structure. So it comes down to this point, and now we need the value chain. So what are the primary activities and the supporting activities? We're going to greet our customer, determine their needs, rent a bike, and have them return the bike and pay. So how do we convey the greeting customer? Oh, you want a bike? Okay, so the supporting business process, well, there is none. You just ask them. Determine the needs. You can say, bikes are over there, help yourself, and you could have physical control and procedures to prevent bike theft. That would be a supporting business process. Rent the bike. Okay, fill out this form and bring it to me when you're done. How do you support that? Well, you have printed forms and a shoebox to store them in. And then for the return, say, show me the bike. Okay, you owe $23.50. Now pay. And there's a shoebox again with the rental form, minimal credit card, and cash receipt system. So it's kind of a bare bones value chain that supports the strategy of low-cost rental to students. You can see this isn't very robust. They're using shoe boxes. It's kind of informal. But now, what if our strategy is a little bit different? You have a high service rental to executives at a conference resort. Same value chain, but the way that you implement it is different because your strategy is different. So the message to implement competitive strategy, you can see it's customized. Um, there's some sort of information system that was built so that we know what they rented last time, and that is through a customer tracking and past sales activity system. So this is where you, as an information systems analyst or someone knowledgeable in that, could add value to a company to support the strategy. And then you can determine their needs. How is the salesman going to know this information? Well, employ training and information system to match customer and a bike. It's going to be biased to upsell the customer. Now, when you rent it, you're going to scan the bike's number into the system and adjust the seat for them. Well, why? How does that work? Well, there's automated inventory system to check the bike out of inventory. And then the return, you collect information like how was your ride. You get the bike's tags so you can scan it back in. Would you like a beverage? So you're offering like a custom experience to this client. And you can offer to put it on the hotel bill, or would you prefer to pay now? That only happens because you have an automated inventory system to place it back in inventory. You have payment documents prepared, and you integrate with the resort's billing system. So that's a more robust value chain, and it's the only reason why you'd have a robust value chain like that is because it's supporting the strategy that you've decided to pursue. We use information systems to provide competitive advantages. Well, with product implementations, it'll help you create a new product, enhance products, differentiate products, so you can just make your product better and better and better. Like the iPhone keeps getting better, theoretically. Some people say it doesn't really change that much. Some people do say it change. Some of them change a bunch, whereas other times they don't. But the goal is to enhance it, create new ones, differentiate. And then there's process implementations, which Apple does as well. You can lock in customers. You do that by signing them up for the iCloud. Once you get a year's worth of data on the iCloud, it becomes way harder to leave because you're already tied to this ecosystem. Lock in suppliers, raise barriers to entry. You think it's easy to start a cell phone operating system business now? No, it's probably very difficult. Actually, it is very difficult. Establish alliances and reduce costs. Reducing costs through process improvements. That's always been huge, but that was like the big focus in the 70s and 80s. Using processes through like Six Sigma to reduce waste and costs. So you can use information systems, what we're going to talk about in this class, to support these two big ways to help competitive advantage. That's it for this chapter. The big focus I wanted to have is, let's go back to this slide, is just understanding the principle that you have industry structure, which it is what it is. Like, the industry structure is there. You're not going to change that, at least not until you're a giant player in it. But that is going to help, that is going to inform your competitive strategy. You can use any of these within the industry, but you need to look at the industry when you pick what your competitive strategy is going to be. Once you have that, then you build the value chains. And then you go back to Chapter 2 concepts with the business processes. And then Chapter 2 as well with the information systems. So this is what's there first. That informs this, which informs this, which informs this, which informs this. Now I want to talk about the ethics case that I have as the assignment for this chapter. It's the lure of love bots, a dating website where 15% of the subscribers were female and 85% were male. So the company decided to trick the men by having bots pretend to be women to make it closer to like a 40-60 or 50-50 split, even though it was artificial. So you want to keep them interested, the men interested, because they're paying subscribers. So send some messages from a dummy account, and that'll trick these men. It can be handled with AI bots. So you're going to be asked some questions about that. Is it illegal? Is it legal? Is it ethical? Unethical? What would you do in that situation if you were asked to work for a company that was doing that? That is it for Chapter 3. Thank you.